Hello, everyone. I actually planned on starting 30 minutes ago, but um, I started having a bunch of people messaging me, so I didn't really get a chance to, get started. I had to settle that first. But anyway, we're getting close to New Year's. I know that I missed last week because of all of the interruptions from holiday stuff, and there's just a lot going on with friends and family that I had to participate in and deal with at the time. So I couldn't really like physically be here right now. Um, but this week, what I was wanting to talk about is attachment and expectations and how those things affect people's behaviors and emotions. Um, there's a lot of information on this topic, and I know I'm not the only one who has talked about this when it comes to mental health and recovery and, things like that. Um, but the reason why I was wanting to talk about it is because I've noticed this popping up a lot in the last couple of days. It might be kind of hard to tell because I look like just had it at this point, and but for most part things have been really great the last couple weeks. I've been taking a lot better care of myself physically, and so I feel a lot better physically as a result. um but the last couple of days have just been really hard, which is why I've decided to talk about attachment and expectations, because I realized in the last couple of days with all the different people I've been dealing with and their responses to me and my responses to them that weren't so positive, and just all the negative emotions, and ups and downs and emotions, um, and why that is. And the two words I could think of is attachment and expectations. Um, because that's what it boils down to. Because if you get really upset about either something happening or something not happening, it's either because you have an attachment to a specific outcome or person or whatever or things, or it's because you had a certain expectation that you expected another person to meet, or you expected, like, say, you expected a bonus check and you didn't get a bonus check for Christmas or whatever, since that's something that's recently passed. And I guess some people have jobs that get bonus checks. I don't know. I've heard that's a thing. Never known anyone that actually had that, but it's a thing apparently. And um, that's why really to to be grounded and to have true happiness, you have to be able to, I don't want to say be totally detached, because that's going too far in the opposite direction, but have you do have to avoid becoming too attached to things, because if you do become too attached to things like codependents tend to do, they tend to become extremely attached to their partner or to family members. And so then, whenever something happens in that relationship, they end up having an extremely tumultuous and just negative, that's a negative is what I mean, but that's not the word I'm looking for. Neurotic, a tumultuous and neurotic reaction to, whatever perceived negative thing is happening in that relationship or involving that person. Um, like couples go through this all the time where they think one person has changed, but they got attached to that person's old identity, and so they're which also put in place an expectation of that person. So they never expected that person to change. They expected that person to always be the same, and just that doesn't happen. If people do stay exactly the same, it's because they're not evolving, they're not growing, they're not learning, they're not actually living life. They're just playing a certain character, and they're not really being themselves. Um, or they're afraid to find out who they actually are. And so they don't ever do anything except play a certain role that they think others expect them to play, or that they have put this expectation on themselves because they have an attachment to a certain image that they are trying to live up to. And so they act out this role while never actually learning more about themselves. So you can see how this topic actually can cover a whole bunch of different reasons why people do the things that they do. Um, and, attachment can be very dangerous for you if you're somebody who does get attached to things. I know for me, that's what I used to say. And me saying it, I think actually probably made it worse because I was affirming that, yes, this is the way that I am. I get very attached to people, or I get attached to people very quickly, or I fall in love easily. Like I would say these things, and then I would see those patterns playing out in my life where it's like, the subconscious is just accepting that and it's going, yes, you, you get attached to people, you fall in love easily, you move too fast with people, and so I was seeing that pattern play out in my life, and I'm still trying to break away from attachment without having full detachment, because having full detachment means that you are not present to the moment, and you are also not living life because you've gone so far to the opposite extreme, to where you won't let anybody into your eternal world, which is what a lot of narcissistic people end up doing. um, and so a narcissistic person is pretty much just like a codependent person, but they don't show a lot of codependent behaviors, which some narcissists do. Like some people are codependent and narcissistic. But talking about a true narcissist, they go to the opposite extreme of detachment, to where they are so afraid of getting hurt, they don't let anybody in, and they detach themselves from any emotions. Like you'll hear narcissists or sociopaths say, I do not experience any kind of emotions, that other than every once in a while, maybe rage, or like sometimes joy, but it's usually they don't experience any positive emotions. And if they do, it's usually because something bad happened to somebody that they didn't like or that they wanted to punish, um, like an ex-lover. So that's going too far in the opposite extreme. You don't want to be completely detached, like in my case where I was dissociating because I was not able to deal with the strong negative emotions that I was having and experiencing, because I was pretty much held hostage in my life and trapped. And so I could not feel those feelings, because if I did feel them, then I would act as one who is feeling and experiencing those kinds of emotions, and then I would be punished for having those kinds of emotions, because the other person was not okay for me to have those emotions, which I guess to some degree I still experience that, but not on that, like on a very mild level compared to an extreme level where you're literally like, no, you are only okay with what I want you to be okay with. And, you want exactly what I want, that this is how you show me you love me is by being me, basically. And just, you have no self. You are me. You are a projection of me. And in order for me to feel safe with you, then I have to control everything about your life, which means I need to be able to be in your mind, controlling you all the time, all the way to the point of your subconscious mind, everything that you dream, everything that you feel, like every automatic response that you have has to benefit me, and suit their agenda, whatever that is. Um, but so I was not physically or emotionally able to deal with that because I was being punished for having feelings. And so I would just became more and more detached from my feelings, which also kind of caused problems in the end because then I was also detaching from caring about the punishment anymore either. And so it was just a total back and forth to where it's like, okay, well, I have to care enough not to get in trouble, but I have to be detached from my own feelings because if I have my feelings and they see my feelings or I show it by mistake, then I'm going to be punished for it. And so I ended up having a total dissociation from my body. Like I said, it was to the point of physically being detached. My physical existence was altered, um, severely. And it was a very, very terrifying and uncomfortable experience that lasted for a couple of months. And I'm glad that things finally returned to normal after that relationship ended. And I started being able to take care of myself and work on feeling those emotions again, which I talked a little bit about on this channel already. But just reiterating the fact, I do not want you guys to go to that extreme of being so detached that you do not feel your feelings. And you don't want to have like no expectations in life because there's a balance, like with anything about spiritual stuff or manifesting things, which you could call it spiritual stuff or you could just call it your subconscious mind working for you. Pretty much every religion has its own version of this, and science talks about it as well. So whichever viewpoint or background you want to come from, it's beneficial to you. And so I try to use different vocabulary so that it's resonating and I'm trying to think. I can't think of the words. I'm sorry. But so that it's relatable to every type of audience because this is literally something that would help every type of audience member, and every kind of background you can think of has this truth. um, so yeah, you got to have a balance. You cannot be so detached that you're not a part of this world and you're not living your life, or have zero expectations to where you don't have any goals in life, or you have no morals about yourself. Because if you had no expectations at all, then that means you also wouldn't have any expectations on yourself and how you are supposed to perform and function in our civilization and society. So you can't do that. You can't go into complete chaos, um, or complete order. You got to have a balance of both the chaos and the order, of you got to have the yin and the yang. You got to have both of those in order to have a happy life. But specifically, we are focusing on the dangers of attachment disorders, because having attachments like what we're talking about with codependency, It is a disorder, and it is something that we seem to be breeding in our society more and more. We are increasing in codependency, we're increasing in narcissism, we're increasing on codependent narcissism and other various mental disorders, because of the way that our society has been trained. Now, I think the reason why we're taught to have all these kinds of attachment, like material things, that is what our society has really focused on, is an attachment to material things where people have fallen in love with stuff or money. And all that stuff is great, but the thing is we shouldn't be attached to any of those things, because if you do become attached, like, it's okay to like it, but if you're attached to it, then that means that can be used to manipulate you and to control you. And that is exactly what our government is doing. And not just our government, but the world government. Um, that's a part of their agenda. And if it's not the government, it's definitely been seeded into the government. But as far as, like, who they is behind this, there is clearly an agenda to have people being overly attached and overly emotional and volatile to these things. And people wouldn't be so emotionally explosive if they were not attached to certain idealizations. Like, we have created a very opinionated society and an uneducated, opinionated society, where people just hear something and they get an opinion from it, and then they are firmly in that opinion, and you're not allowed to have a free thought about anything. Because if you have a free thought, or if you have opposing thoughts in your own mind, then, oh, no, like, people get mad and freak out and say, no, you have to pick a side. And it's like, no, you don't have to pick a side. Um, like something I said to someone recently, it's like, why does there always have to be a bad guy? Why can't it just be what you want is different from what I want? And um, sorry, I was rambling there for a minute, so it caused me to lose my train of thought. Um, but the reason why we have been programmed to having these attachments is because a society that is overly emotional, overly sentimental, and attached to things or people or beliefs, then they are a lot easier to manipulate and control. And the same with expectations, because usually attachment and expectation plays hand in hand. So, if you have high expectations of somebody, for example, like, this is veering back towards what we was talking about in the beginning as far as personal relationships, but we may end up back as far as on the global scale of how that affects things in a minute. But as far as a personal relationship, if you have expectations, especially high expectations or unreasonable expectations, that's another thing that people fail to look into about themselves, is, are my expectations reasonable? And so that's something good to look into as well, as what is a reasonable expectation to have on yourself and others. Like, for me, I am hypercritical of myself. And, well, I would say in some ways I'm hypercritical, and in other ways I'm hypocritical, where I have very low self-criticism in some areas of my life, but for most of the part, I'm hypercritical of myself. And so I usually have very high expectations of myself, my character, my actions, things that I say and do. And if I fail to live up to them, then, you know, have I have a hard time not beating myself up mentally and emotionally about that. Um, and for a long time, I had extremely, I wouldn't say extremely high, but like even with reasonable expectations, you have to understand that other people are still human beings and that they are going to make mistakes and they have their own goals and their own feelings and their own things in life that may not always coincide with what you want. And one of the bad things is people want to have an expectation, and then if anything deviates from 100% of the image that they are attached to or the expectation that they have placed in their mind. And a lot of times these people will not even tell the other person what their expectations are, but yet they still have these extreme expectations, and then they get upset when they're not met perfectly. And then I mean, that's when you get, for example, with narcissists, because I have been in some narcissistic relationships, it's like if you fail to meet a narcissist expectations perfectly, then you will experience the full wrath of narcissistic rage. And codependents a lot of times act in the same way. Like I know in when I was much younger in some of my relationships, even if some of the expectations that I had were reasonable and I had a right to be upset, my response was over the top about it. And the way that it affected me more than it really should have because I was too attached to that person and to the image and idea I had in my mind of how I wanted them to be versus how they actually were. And that's the other issue with expectations is because we have an expectation of somebody, and so we automatically make it true that that is who they are without giving that person a chance to show us who they actually are. And so, that's something too that's been programmed in our society, especially as far as romantic relationships, where everyone at some point in their life, usually starting in childhood, had an expectation put in their mind, an image of what, you know, a love interest should be like, and how the perfect relationship should work and everything. And a lot of times, most of the time, that's not how relationships work. And again, like I said, people do change. And so you may love somebody today, and then a year from now, you've changed and that person has changed. And so you either have to accept those changes and fall in love with getting to know that person again. That's really what love is. Like, I don't want to get too much into the love topic because I am recently single, and I don't want to speak too much on that topic because I am still learning a lot as far as what love between a man and woman, or man and woman, a romantic type of love connection, what all entails with that. But I do believe that it's something like this where when the two of you change, you have to constantly be getting to know the person that you're with, because we as human beings are constantly changing. And those changes are much more obvious in more intimate connections than they are like socially. And um, especially usually in a romantic union, you have, you show all of your ugly side. And, unless, of course, you're someone who is, again, just playing a role and trying to hide who you actually are. And then you don't admit to your feelings, or, you're not honest. But any kind of, like, you can't have love without honesty. And so you have to have honesty in a relationship. Like, honesty is the backbone of a relationship because otherwise it will not work. Um, and you're not being fair to yourself or the other person if you're not being honest about your feelings and your expectations. And so it's very important that you share with your partner what your expectations are, especially before making any kind of commitments, and you will have to revisit these things over and over again throughout the course of your relationship until, you reach a point where both of you either decide that it's, no longer like, you've changed so vastly, let's say, and your goals in life are just so, different. Like, you have a dream, you have to move to LA, and they want to move to Australia or wherever else to fulfill their dream. And say, for whatever reason, that does not reasonably work. And then you decided to go your separate ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people need to stop condemning other people because, again, there's an expectation. Oh, you meet the one and you fall in love, and then you're together for 50 years until you die. And that's a wrong expectation to place on people. Wrong to place that expectation in our society that you have to be a relationship or something's wrong with you, or that you have to have children or something's wrong with you, let alone that your relationship has to be, you know, perfect, or that, oh, well, you just didn't work hard enough on your relationship. That's why it didn't work out. And it's like, no, sometimes people just have irreconcilable differences because they have changed. But in an ideal relationship, when you change and that person change and we're always changing constantly, like sometimes I know for me, sometimes I can change several times within 1 week as far as like what I believe, what I think, what I feel, what my moods are, and what my dreams are about the future. Most of the time they're pretty consistent, but I have had weeks like that to where it was like day after day, I felt a little bit differently about something, or I would talk to somebody, again, have a free thinking conversation with somebody, or watch some videos of opposing opinions, or just discussing the different sides of the topic I was interested in at that moment. And then I would walk away with slightly different opinions. And I think that that is okay and that is normal. And so this is the last thing I want to say about the romantic side of that, and then we're going to get back to the actual topic. But for a romantic relationship, you have to constantly be falling in love with a new person every day. And you have to enjoy the journey of getting to know this person over and over again, and allowing them to get to know you over and over again. So yeah, even though I'm not as opinionated on love and my expectations of love have really fallen way down from what they was, which might be a good thing, but it kind of ended up being on the cynical side there for a little bit, but I'm starting to open back up to the idea of that, well, at some point in my life, I will meet the person that is destined for me, and that they will have the same goals in life as I do, that we will have the same mission. So, on all the important things, like say the big five, we'll just say, of goals that we have in our lives, where we want to live, and all those things will line up, and we'll have amazing chemistry together too, and somehow fall in love and stay in love. Like, very few people actually have, because they changed together. So yeah, but that's it on all the romantic stuff that's in that. So back to attachment and expectations. Um, Again, I talked about in our society how there's several expectations placed on us. Like on the romantic side, you're expected to be in a relationship. If you're not in a relationship, then it must be because you are a degenerate reject and no one wants to be with you. Or you're mentally ill, and so you can't get along with another person long enough to make a union work. Um, and then because there is an expectation that you have to be in a relationship, then people end up getting into relationships way too fast that are extremely toxic and unhealthy. Or, like I said, they just get in too fast. And so then you have religion on the other hand, especially down here in the South. You have churches saying, okay, well, you're in a relationship, so now you have to get married or you're living in sin. And it's like, what? Okay, so then now you're forced to get married because of expectations imposed on you. And then you're either stuck in that relationship, or because you moved too fast and did all of that, it's like now, you are put into financial ruins, or you ended up having a child. And so you end up, there's just a whole mess of things that happen. And then you get a divorce if you finally do get a divorce, and then you're publicly shamed basically for getting a divorce. Um, and again, the expectations that people have that, oh, well, if they got divorced, then they must have not tried hard enough, or they must not loved each other enough. And that's all bullcrap. That is all expectations that have been programmed into your mind to manipulate you into doing these things. And, the reason why is because there is a game being played. That's really the only way I know how to describe it. It's like, there's either it's either one of two things or both of these things. There's either some kind of an agenda, which I believe there is, to have complete and total control over societies, especially because our society is a very large society compared to the people that are in power of our country. Let alone if you think about the very few people that are in power worldwide and are in the elite families worldwide versus the actual population of commoners like the rest of us that make the world go round. You have to manipulate people into being controlled. And people don't realize that they're being controlled. But, that's because we're programmed. But it starts at a very young age, which is another reason I'm not going to get into it. But one of the reasons why I don't like public school is because I believe it is a part of the government trying to program people into fitting into a certain mold. Plus, too, it's a way for the government to have eyes on your children and label them one way or the other. Like that movie Divergent, where they had to go through all these tests and stuff, and it's like, if they were divergent, they were killed or something, I think. But that's pretty much what the school system is for. They watch your children and see how they behave, and then the ones that are resisting the programming, they label them with mental disorders, or say they have ADHD or some other issues, or they blame the parents and then come and take your kids because it's like, well, they're not behaving well in school and we think that it's a home issue, relating back to CPS here. So there's several different things I don't like about it. And so then, the ones that aren't the teacher's pets, they, you know, end up going to jail and stuff because they're then programmed that no, it's not that there's anything wrong with the system that we have in place. It's that there is something wrong with you. You are just a bad egg. You are just a malfunctioning um, piece of code that we want to eradicate. And so then they send the person down on this self destructive path. And then, of course, when they become grown, and it's like, oh, yeah, they've become this, drug addict, thug criminal. And they say, see, we were right. There was something wrong with them. It's like, no, you made them that because you programmed them at a young age that they were that. And it's like, what do you think that's going to do to a child? You tell them that they're bad. They don't have the reasoning up here that an adult would have to say, "No, I'm not, and actually I have a lot of stuff in my life to prove otherwise." No, they are a sponge and they're going to absorb all that programming. And so that's the same thing with the attachment and expectations. We are told that we should be attached to other loved ones, to material things, and so it's easy to be manipulated and controlled. Like, for example, why do we have a belief that we need to have a roof over our head in order to be happy and to survive? Now, I'm not encouraging people to go be a van dweller or go pitch a tent in the woods somewhere or anything like that, but I am saying that you actually don't really need those things to be happy, but you think that you do because you were given these expectations by society and you were taught to be attached to these things. And so, therefore, it can be used to manipulate you. You're forced to stay in a job that you hate because you have to have a roof over your head, or you have to have this car, or your children have to go to this school because that is something that you have become attached to. Because at some point, the thought was put in your mind, and thoughts are like seeds, right? And so the seed was put there, and then you allowed it to stay there and grow, and then the more it grows, the stronger the roots are and the harder it is to undo that belief system and to remove those kinds of thoughts and attachment and expectations. And I am not saying this as someone who has successfully been able to do this in all areas of my life, because again, in recent conversations, I realized that I reacted to people out of that feeling of attachment, and expectation, because they were behaving in a way that I did not want them to behave. And because I guess because of having an expectation of how they should be behaving or how they should handle situations versus the kind of person that they are and how they actually would handle a situation, or just not having any expectation at all that any reaction from them is possible, which is probably the best thing, is to be open to them being free to make whatever decision they want to make about how they want to behave with you from one day to the next. um, and then, of course, you have free will to choose if you see a pattern of behavior in somebody that is not conducive to your life, to remove yourself from the situation. But then, in order to do that, you have to not have such a strong level of attachment that you cling on to that. For example, here's a good example for expectation, because I want to use two completely different people in the same situation. Let's say that we have a pregnant woman, and she is, she's expecting what? She is expecting a child. She has a miscarriage, or the child is stillborn. She cries, she's devastated, she's grieving, like this is the worst possible thing that she can imagine happening to her right now. Here's this woman over here. She is not pregnant, doesn't expect to have children, and she's okay with that. Why is it any different? Why is this person okay? Hold on, I will get to your question in just a minute. But how is this person okay with them not having a child, with them not giving birth, But this one over here, who was expecting child, is completely devastated by the same outcome. That's why we call it expecting. When you are expecting something and it doesn't come to fruition, you have grown attached to the idea of that. And so, therefore, it is devastating to you. And we must not become attached to any particular outcome. And another way of manifesting what we want is to, for one, don't have the expectation. Like, you put the energy out there of what you want to happen, but don't have an expectation that it has to happen that way or you will be devastated otherwise. And two, do not have any judgment on the outcome, either outcome as being good or bad. Merely, you have chosen in your mind which one you prefer, but you do not want to create any kind of negative energy towards either outcome. So, someone asked a question. Noon Enan, I hope I pronounced that right. So, how can we use this knowledge to help with our cases or to help other people with their case? Have low expectations of CPS and courts. I wouldn't say that. This is mostly, this part here is mostly focused on the healing aspect of like people who have already lost their children. And it's also for your own mental and emotional health as well when you are dealing with these types of cases, to not have certain expectations either way. Because I feel like when you're saying have low expectations, that what you're actually saying is have bad expectations of CPS and the courts. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we shouldn't have any expectation, like the English word none. Okay, none. Okay, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is to not have any expectation either way as far as these people. Like, do not make judgments about these people, good or bad. Many of the people, as evil as their actions have been towards many families, and I know in my case there was a few in particular who were very evil and cruel to both me and my children and my mother. But even so, at the end of the day, they are still human beings. And if stories throughout history and every religion or non-religious, I don't know what you would call it if it's non-religious, but anecdotal content that we have, whether it's the movies or stories that's been passed down through generations, is that that is the one thing that is unpredictable about the human condition, is that humans are able to change. And humans are, in the end, unpredictable. Like in general, you could have a computer or whatever, a psychologist, a sociologist, scientist, try to predict the outcomes of people. But the thing is we actually still do not know what it is that makes people decide to do the things that they do. And a person can change instantly. And so that's why I'm saying do not have any expectations, and to not have a negative or a positive expectation about your case, and to also not have an attachment, because if you have an attachment, like with me, because of the expectations I put on myself, I feel like I actually may have caused a negative outcome in my case because of the reactions that I had in the beginning because of attachments and beliefs and expectations that I had. Because I had the expectation that and the thought of, "Oh, I've been arrested, you know, for child neglect. So therefore, I need to just give up now because no person has that I know has ever had this charge and gotten their children back." And so, it's like I messed myself up at the very beginning. And then it's like the more that time went on, when I did start fighting, even at that point, it was like I had already had these expectations of that, that I knew how I had responded in the beginning, and so I knew that that probably made me look bad. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had all of these thoughts and expectations, and then I also had the attachment of that I was so attached to how my life was supposed to be with my children. For one of the reasons why I had started going into a depression before CPS even got involved was because I had had an expectation of, okay, me and my children's father, that we were together, we are a family. And in order to be a family, we have to stay together in a civil union with one another, and we have to live in the same home and parent our children from the same home, and we have to love each other, or even if we don't love each other, we have to show that to our children that we are a family unit and we all love each other as a family, even if we weren't romantically connecting at the time because of stuff that happened in our personal relationship that shouldn't affect our children's relationship or the way that they view us as their mom and dad. So because my image of the perfect family of mommy and daddy being in the same home together and my children not being from a broken home, and the idea of that, okay, even after he left, I had this attachment that, okay, I am pregnant, he will come back, especially because I am having a girl and he has wanted a girl for over 22 years and has thought he could never have one. And we found out that I'm actually carrying a girl, he will come back. So I had these expectations of that he will come back, he will come back, he will come back. And but then I also had this, it was coming from attachment. It wasn't necessarily that I even really believed that. It was that I was attached to that this has to happen in order for me and our children to be okay. And that didn't happen, at least by the point the CPS thing happened, because it had been a year. And in my mind, again, expectations, if you were legally married, which we weren't, but in my mind, I was like, okay, if we had been legally married, we would have to be separated for at least a year before we could get divorced. And so when that year mark came up, I went into a depression because I was doing everything by myself, and I had the expectation that I shouldn't have to be doing everything by myself. And I had extremely high expectations on myself that I cannot keep him from his children, and I want them to have a great relationship with their dad. And so I have to go above and beyond to making sure they are in his life, even if it really inconveniences me or keeps me from getting my sleep or doing what I need to do to take care of me. That, I just had too many expectations on me. And then also, I was attached to the idea of that it shouldn't be this way. And so that's all that I'm saying is we have to let go of those attachments because they can be used to control us, and they can also break us when the image that we are seeing in our life is not the image that we are attached to or that we are idolizing. Like, you think about what attachment actually means. It means you're worshiping something, you're idolizing an image in your mind that you got from somewhere or you made up. But even if you made it up, it was probably programmed in you as a child, and it's in your subconscious, so you don't even know where it came from. you just suddenly had this image of this is how life should be. Like, this was one of the images I had when I was a child. My image of what I wanted for my life was to become a career woman, to become someone who was extremely passionate about the work that they were doing and was single. Was single. I had no interest in having anything to do with family, none of that. I didn't want a family, I didn't want a husband. I wanted to have one best friend and then a couple of other friends. Like, I wanted a support system, but I really wanted like one friend, one really good friend that I could share everything with, like a companion, almost like a romantic relationship, but without the romantic stuff. I wanted a very loving, deep, intimate, platonic relationship with someone. And for me to have an empire, for me to be a businesswoman. And what ended up happening is I was constantly being told that, oh well, you'll change, like you'll get older, and you won't feel the same way anymore, that you're gonna fall in love and all this stuff's gonna happen, or you're gonna meet some guy. I kept being told constantly that no, the image you have for yourself, that that's my real image, because now I'm back to this point in my life, and that image has returned to me that, yeah, that's actually really what I want. That I got attached to these other things, but now, I've returned back to that state to where that's what I really want. Like, this channel means a lot to me, where I want to be able to do this for other people. And I also want to do, first and foremost, I want to do things for myself. And I know that might sound selfish, but I have to take care of myself and have things in my life that I love and I'm passionate about before I can give of myself to people. You have to put, you know, water, for example, into the vessel before you can take anything out of that vessel to pour into other people's cups. And so, I have to take care of myself first. And then, this is also something very important to me, because I believe it is my mission to help other people. And it's like I can't do it by myself. I'm just one person. That's why I do these videos every single week, is because I want to get more and more people watching. Like, this is the way YouTube works. The more you post, and the more people that watch you, and the longer that they watch you for on, like, say, these live streams, then the more the algorithms will favor your content, which means it will reach more people. So then more people will watch your stuff, and then, it builds, it snowballs. And so that's why I've tried to be really strict about doing this every single week, because I know that there's not a whole lot that I can do right now. And I know that even though I have a lot of knowledge compared to the average person with these things, I do not have as much knowledge as I need to have to really, really, truly be able to help you guys. But I'm wanting to build the group so that we can have more and more people, and I can have more and more resources that I can reach out to and pull from to help you, or anyone else that is interested in this type of content. And so that's why a lot of times I end up talking about psychology or spiritual. It's not really spiritual stuff, but the way that I come off makes it sound spiritual because I relate to it in the spiritual sense, even though it is a scientific phenomenon, if you will. But like, I try to balance both. I try to stay grounded in reality and science, but religion and spirituality is also extremely important to me. And I try to look at where those two things meet and base that on my truth. Like, that's what I believe to be true, is where those two things put together. that's all you can do. You helped me with mine. Well, I'm glad that this stuff actually helps anybody. Again, psychology and that type of stuff is those are things that I know a lot about and I have a lot of experience. And so, maybe it was necessary for my life to be derailed by people basically forcing me to believe that I have to fall in love and be in a relationship. Definitely, at least at that point in my life, was not for me. It may be to my benefit because I had some experiences from it that I can share with you guys because, I don't want this to just be about CPS, but I'm also making the channel for more mental health things and toxic relationships and just other general self-help stuff, which can help people with CPS. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is like if this channel ever becomes monetized or if I receive any kind of funding, that funding will go towards helping families, like, say, afford an attorney that's not bought and paid for by the courts. So that's some of the goals that I have. I want to eventually have a trust fund. I don't know if that's what you would call it. I'm not sure what you call it when it's for. I guess it'd be a business account or a non-profit organization type thing. I'm not really sure what the label would be, but I want to have some kind of funding eventually put in place to help out families that are reaching out and they cannot afford a good attorney. Um, like I said, this it's a really high expectation, but I know that it's going to take a lot of time, and so that's why I do these videos every week, and I'm going to keep doing them, and eventually the channel will be a bigger thing. So the most I can do right now is really offer you guys the lessons I've learned in my life, and the psychology and nature of human beings and how to deal with our own complex nature because sometimes the hardest person to deal with is yourself. I know for me that has been the case where it was like sometimes it wasn't even other people putting expectations on me, but because I had placed the expectation on myself that I should do certain things for other people, that I put it upon myself to believe that this person did expect something, which they had not vocalized to me that they actually had, then I ended up forcing myself to do a lot of things that were not beneficial to me and did not affect the relationship well because then I felt resentful towards this person I was doing so much for, which has happened several times. So I can help you guys with those things. And again, starting New Year's, I will be reading this and I'm going to try to get some highlighters and stuff against the North Carolina family and related laws. And so this year, hopefully, I will gain a lot of family law knowledge, which will be more helpful and beneficial to the channel and to you guys. So that's my goal for this year. I want to read that this year. Unless I have a whole year to read it, and as I learn things, I will try to simplify them for you guys because a lot of times that's what I do in my research is I will read documents or the scholarly articles, medical journals, those types of things, and then I'll try to simplify it for the people that I talk to. But yeah, but again, maybe I was meant to go through those expectations and not be living my truth so that I would be put on this path that led me here. It led me to me losing my children because, for one, men became, or having a man in my life, a romantic relationship became the most important thing in my life. Like, once from the very first relationship I had, the very first one, like once I had been pushed into the expectation that I have to be in a relationship, I have to fall in love. And then at some point, it ended up happening. and, well, in love. I was really too young for it to be in love. It was puppy love. And once that happened, and it was not a healthy relationship either. The person was very verbally abusive to me, which then tore down my fragile self esteem. And it just snowballed from there to where I kept attracting people in my life that were treating me like I was worthless. And so it's like I would believe it. And then the more I believed it, the more I would attract those same types of people. And, on and on and on until I ended up having my children's father. We had children. Then you guys know what happened after that. So maybe it was meant to happen. But I believe now at this point we have free will. And so we can choose for most of the part what it is we want to go through in this life. And we have actually already chosen ahead of time, I believe, but that's the spiritual side of me. But realistically, you have a right to choose, and you can choose to work on not having these attachment issues and to not having expectations. It doesn't mean have low or negative expectations, but just not having any expectations and accepting life and people as they come your way. Let's see. I mean, I ain't at the end yet, but knowing other people has gone through it and understanding how CPS is. Yeah. Um, yeah, it is important to know. And I know because of the topic being CPS that we do talk about a lot of negative things on here. Um, but it's like I'm not meaning for it to be negative. It's just I'm stating the facts of the actions of this organization, and what needs to change within that organization. That's the only thing I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say it so that we have an expectation that they will always continue to be this way. No, I'm acknowledging it. So it's like, okay, we see that there's a problem with this system. We need to get together as citizens of this country and fix the system, which I'm sure there's been people for many years trying to do, but the this is this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. My career and everything may change, but this will be one thing in my life that I want to do until the end. I will always keep fighting. I did not stop fighting just because I lost my children or just because I lost my parental rights. And that's the point for me. That was always the strong part of me with my children, is that I want my children to know I never stopped fighting. Even if it is too late for us, and even if they end up growing up and they never come back home because they've been brainwashed to believe and have expectations and have a false attachment to the people that they're with, and have expectations that I'm this terrible person. Even if that is the case and we never heal, it's still my love as their mother is for me to fight for them, like for their memory and for our relationship. And that is for me to fight for this system to change and to save other families from having to go through this. Um, but again, I'm only one person, so there's only so much I can do right now. But I'm sure if I do this for the next 40 years of my life or however long that I live, that we will grow as a group. And then people in that group will grow their own groups, and eventually they will have no choice but to change the system. You know, we're not expecting this to happen in a year or two. We're not even expecting this to happen in the next 10 years. It may be our entire lifetime before we have a generation of people that are wise and, you know, whose eyes are open to it and who change it. But anyway,